Do you have the COVID blues? Hey guys, James here. I'm one of the founders of Cortex Education, and I'm a college admissions consultant focusing on personal development as the best way to achieve success. These days with the pandemic going around, I'm seeing all kinds of responses that people are making. I see people who are just sitting back and be like, oh man, my school is closed, my teachers aren't doing anything, they're not teaching, I'm not ready for the AP exam. And then on the other hand, you see some people really taking charge, creating new organizations, pushing their organizations to start meeting online so they can still make progress during this time. And it really got me thinking that this is a time when we should really start to distinguish between people who have a certain trait that helps them succeed and people who don't. And that trait that I'm talking about is understanding the difference between fault and responsibility. And what that means is that you know that even when things that are happening in the world are not your fault, you can still take responsibility to make the most of the situation. And this isn't something new that I'm just noticing now with the pandemic going around. I've seen this for years in working with students and in my own life as well, as I went through high school, through college, through law school, and the first few years of my career. What I see is that people are always mistaking those two concepts, fault and responsibility. Let me give you an example and see if you can relate to this one. I hear this all the time. Oh yeah, I got a 0 on the homework because, the teacher didn't say when it was due and I didn't know, right? So that's a really common situation. I hear this all the time. And so what should we actually do in a situation like that? Well, what you need to do is take responsibility and say, oh, actually, I don't know when this thing is due. It's not my fault that the teacher didn't do his or her part and tell me when it was due, but you know what? I know that I'm responsible for getting this thing in on time, so I'm gonna go ask. Right? It's not that hard. I think there's a mental block that happens when you think, well, it's the other person's fault that I don't have what it takes to succeed. That's a really common situation that I see in working with students, and we really have to work to get over that mindset and get into the mindset of what is my responsibility in this situation and how can I take action? And let's talk about how this applies to the pandemic. I see some students really stratifying out, where some students are sitting back and saying, well, it's not my fault that the pandemic is happening, and I'm sure colleges will just know that, and they're going to excuse the fact that maybe I'm not doing a whole lot this summer. Maybe I'm just going to stay in and and not start a passion project. I'm not going to do any set up remote meetings for my organizations, all that, right? I'm seeing that happening, and then I also see other students who are like, you know what, the pandemic is happening, it's here. What am I going to do about it? How am I going to move forward? And the difference, you can bet that the difference between the first group of students who's just sitting back and the second group of students who's taking responsibility to keep moving forward despite what's going on in the world, that difference is going to be even bigger in this fall with seniors who are about to apply to college, and for at least another year or two after that, because college admissions officers, you can bet, are really looking into whether you're actually taking responsibility to step up and do something special for your community, for your world at a time like this. That's for high school students. And if you're in college, same thing. Really think about, how can I take responsibility for my education? If you can't go back to your campus this fall, how do you set up your life to make sure that you're really continuing your education in the best way possible? Does that mean that you need to set up your home learning environment to be free of distraction? Does that mean that you have to practice productivity habits now in order to not be distracted as you're trying to attend an online class where maybe the topic isn't your favorite? So you want to make sure that you're doing everything that you can. And I talk about this with my students all the time in terms of the traits that colleges are looking for. And one of those traits is resilience, and the ability to look at a situation that's challenging and say, okay, this is how I'm going to approach the situation. This is how I'm taking responsibility to navigate this situation. And that is one of the traits that I see common to everybody who succeeds. And people who don't have that trait, who just think, oh well, it's somebody else's fault, or it's the universe's fault that I'm in this pickle. Those are the people who don't succeed, unfortunately. The rest of your life is going to be chaotic. There's going to be all kinds of things that happen that are completely out of your control. So it's a bit like the ocean, right? You have these giant waves that just happen. And if you've ever seen somebody surfing, or if you surf, you can see that what they're doing is they're looking at what the waves are going to be. They're kind of anticipating, and then they ride the wave. They figure out, okay, this is what I'm going to do to ride that wave. They don't just sit there and be like, oh, I wish that the wave were, three feet lower or a little bit slower. Have you ever heard a surfer actually say something like that? No, I'm gonna guess nah, because that's not how the game works. You don't just sit there and wish that the waves were different. It's your job to figure out how to surf those waves. And that's what taking responsibility is all about. Think about your favorite leader. It can be anybody. It can be, a political leader, a social leader, somebody within your family. Think about how that person handles difficult situations, right? Do they, when something happens and it's really not their fault, do they sit back and just go, oh darn, I can't do anything about it? Or do they take responsibility and say, look, this is what I can do? In fact, the main way to actually be a leader and to make an impact is that in times when things are happening and it's not your fault, that's when you actually have to take responsibility to push things forward. Imagine if you only took responsibility when you created a situation, a negative situation, and it was your fault. Well, then all you're doing is you're just making up for all the bad things that you've caused in this world, right? So even if we think about it theoretically, the only way to actually be a leader, to be that person that you want to be, is to say, okay, well, even in situations where things are not my fault, which is usually the case, I'm going to take responsibility to move forward, to create an impact, to grow myself. That's the kind of mindset that I want you guys to think about. And there's one more aspect that I want to address about this question of what's the difference between fault and responsibility. When people mix those two concepts up and we say, okay, well, it's your responsibility to check when the assignment was due or to take action to help to support your community during a time of need, what I'm not trying to say is that, oh, it's your fault that you didn't take action. That's not the point. When we focus on fault, that's a very disempowering kind of situation, right? It's like, oh, it's your fault and you shouldn't have done that, right? That's very disempowering. What I'm talking about is taking responsibility. And responsibility, yes, it can be difficult to mentally get yourself to a place where you're like, I'm going to step up to the plate. But the fact is, if you take responsibility, you're actually empowering yourself to take action, to do something, right? You're saying, this is something I can do, and I'm going to do it. And this is one of the most important differences that, in my opinion, that I've seen between people who don't succeed and people who do. It's that ability to say, okay, I get it. Things are happening, it's not my fault, but I'm gonna do what I can do. I'm gonna take responsibility. So remember, fault and responsibility are totally not the same thing, even though they sound kind of similar, they seem kind of similar. When you are at fault, yes, you have responsibility, but even when you're not at fault, you also have responsibility to take action. And people who understand that are the ones who succeed in the end. And so now that you've listened to me rant about this for a little bit, I'd like you to take some action. The first thing I'd like you to do is think about what's one area in your life where you're not fully taking responsibility yet. And the other thing is, I'd like you to start developing a habit of catching yourself every time you think the phrase, that wasn't my fault, or it was somebody else's fault, or catch yourself every time you think that or every time you say it. And you can follow up that statement with, it's not my fault, but I will take action anyway. Here's what I can do to make the situation better. Remember, it's not about seeking some kind of justice, like, oh, it wasn't my fault, so I'm not gonna take action. What you really should be focusing on is, okay, well, given that the situation is what it is, what am I gonna do about it? How am I gonna surf that wave? Am I gonna sit there and say, oh, the wave should have looked different? Should have been slower, should have been faster, should have been taller, should have been lower? Or are you just gonna go surf that wave, figure out how to surf that wave and rock out? That's what this video is all about. Hopefully that was an empowering message for you all. When I first understood this concept, it was probably around my time in college. It made life make so much more sense. And that's why I want to talk about that with you guys these days, especially with the pandemic going around. It's really important that, look, the pandemic is not your fault, I hope, but you still have a responsibility to yourself, to your community, to take action, to grow, to be the best person that you can be. And that's what colleges are looking for, and frankly, that's what you owe to yourself as well. So if you like this video, hit the like button, because if you don't, then YouTube says, well, that was a crummy video, and the algorithm won't show this to anybody else. Also hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, because I plan to make these videos multiple times per week for the foreseeable future, and you don't want to miss any of them. I enjoy making these videos, and hopefully you enjoy watching them, so I'll keep them coming as long as you keep on watching. And that's it for now. My name's James. I'm one of the founders of Cortex Education, and I'm a college admissions consultant focusing on personal development as the best way to achieve success. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.